Anybody hear me? So thank you for coming to our first seminar series this semester. I'd like to introduce Eric Reutebuch. Hopefully I got your name pronounced right. The title is Alabama Water Watch Monitoring Applications at the Community, County, and State level. So Mr. Reutebuch has 27 years of field biology, research, outreach experience, dealing in areas of aquatic ecology, limnology, and watershed stewardship focused on southeastern streams, rivers, reservoirs, coastal waters, and their communities. Been working with worked with Auburn University Fishery Rivers and Reservoirs Group for 17 years, and then joined Alabama Water Watch full-time in 2006. And in 2013, he accepted the position as Associate Director of Alabama Water Watch around here. So with that, we'll let him inform you what you guys do.
Thank you very much, Brian. I appreciate you and Lateef inviting me here this afternoon to speak. We are right in the Auburn Research Park, our office. I don't know if any of you have been out there to the CASIC building, but we are on the second floor of the CASIC building. We're actually part of the AU Water Resources Center, Water Watch. We merged 3 years ago with the Water Resources Center. And we receive our funding and support from the Alabama Ag Experiment Station, as well as the Alabama Cooperative Extension System. In fact, I was telling Brian that we work with the Forestry, Wildlife, and Natural Resources Management Extension team in the extension projects around the state. Has anybody here heard of Water Watch before today or before seeing the seminar series? Good, good. Anybody gotten trained up as a Water Watch monitor in here? Or know somebody that's gotten trained up? All right. We do have a lot of local monitors in the Auburn, Opelika, Lochapoka, Reeltown area, in the Saugahatchee watershed, and in the Chewacla watershed. And I'll give some examples towards the end of this presentation. If you have any questions, please just feel free to engage in a question during the talk. I did invite interaction, but I want to cover a brief overview of the Water Watch program, talk about some of the tools in our toolbox for our citizen monitors, and then talk about data credibility of all the data that's been collected over the last several years, and talk a little bit about if you were wanting to get started as a monitor, what you'd have to do, what are the costs involved, and then close with several examples of applications at the different municipal, county, and state level. Water Watch is a statewide program, started in 1992, and we do have monitors throughout the state, and I'll show you some statistics on that in a minute. And our main mission is to improve water quality and water management, water policy through citizen monitoring and action. But before I get into the nuts and bolts of that, pretty much every talk that we do around the state, we like to remind people that we're in a very special place related to natural resources. The epicenter of aquatic biodiversity is right here in the southeast. And there are many reasons for that, and if you really want to dig into it, this is an excellent reference, excellent text. Southern Wonder, Alabama's Surprising Biodiversity by Scott Duncan up at Birmingham Southern. And in fact, if you go to the Encyclopedia of Alabama, you'll find out that Alabama is actually #1 in fish species and many of the other aquatic species. I love to fish. I grew up in the Midwest in Indiana, and who knew that I'd end up in the best place in the United States as far as fish goes. 450 species, 350 freshwater species in Alabama. You get out to New Mexico, Arizona, some of those western states, even in the Pacific Northwest, you get into diversities of like 30, 40 species per state. And we've got 325 freshwater species. So incredible aquatic biodiversity, and we always like to let especially the kids know. One of our staffers, Mona Dominguez, works with the 4-H program regularly, and so we like to let all the kids know, as well as adults, that Alabama is #1 in aquatic biodiversity among all 50 states. So what is Alabama Water Watch? I'm going to be talking about that in the next several minutes. In a phrase, it's community-based watershed monitoring and stewardship. We train people all over the state, as I mentioned, and they collect data in their local watersheds. They enter that data in our statewide database, and they act upon that data locally to get engaged in watershed management. These are actually photos all around. That's the Salkehatchie watershed. There's Auburn, Opelika, and we have a lot of activity. This is what we call our bacteria blitz. We do it seasonally, and it's a snapshot of the bacteriological contamination in the watershed. And specifically, we're looking at E. coli. I'll talk a little bit about that later. And if you are interested, I do have these Water Watch brochures. It's got a nice little synopsis of the program and contact information. Our web page is on there and all that good stuff. And in there, you can see the different ways that people can get involved with our program. Number one, get certified in either water chemistry, bacteriological, or stream biomonitoring. But there are other ways, getting involved in data to action, watershed stewardship, sharing your experiences, and giving Water Watch money. We always like to get checks in the mail. So several ways to get involved. Water Watch began in 1992 under the able leadership of Dr. Bill Deutsch. He's the founder of Water Watch. He is retired, but he's still working with the program actively, especially the Global Water Watch program, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And he travels all over the world, basically extending the Water Watch program to many different countries around the world. So just a few statistics. Oops, sorry about that. As of this month, we have over 84,000 water quality records in our online database. The citizen monitors have monitored from all these different sites, from the Tennessee Valley all the way down to Mobile Bay. Over 7,200 monitors certified in the state, and so on, over 2,300 sites. So we are an active program, and our data and activities, data to action strategies are ongoing. Just to talk about some of the tools in the volunteer toolbox that we provide. We have our website. We have training in water monitoring and web-based water data tools and outreach tools. And the website is this alabamawaterwatch.org, and you can see all the different options here. If you want to register for a workshop, you would click right here on the workshop. Or if you want to see water data, you click there on water data, and you can access those 84,000 data records. I'll show you some examples here in a minute. And our main tool in our toolbox is basically our training. Our training programs, we train in water chemistry monitoring, where we train monitors to measure air temperature, water temperature, dissolved oxygen, pH, alkalinity, hardness, and turbidity, to get a baseline profile of your water quality in your river, stream, lake, bay, bayou. And then we do this bacteriological training. This is actually a sample. I don't know if I want to pass it around right before lunch, but if you can observe it here, this is actually an E. coli sample that I took on the outskirts of Camp Hill a couple days ago. And if you look real close, you can see maybe see one blue dot in the middle of that plate. That's an E. coli. The pink dots are just normal coliforms that are found in the soil. So when we train people, what you got to know is to put a ml of water in your media sample, incubate for 24 hours. We teach people to rig up a incubator from a small, like 6-pack cooler and a night light, and incubate for 30 hours to 48 hours, and you'll be able to count the blue dots as the E. coli. And we've run these different tests against standard methods in the lab and gotten good correlations on their credibility, and I'll talk about data credibility in a minute. But this E. coli test, bacteriological test, has become more and more popular, especially with federal and state agencies becoming more and more limited on their funding. If you've been writing research grants or outreach grants over the last 5 to 10 years, you know that it's become more and more competitive and more difficult to get funding to do work, and it's A&M is also much more strapped to do monitoring throughout the state. And another tool in the toolbox is our database, and we went through a major upgrade. It's floating around in the cloud somewhere now, and we do have some distinct advantages of with the new database. This is Sergio and in our staff, and Jim Johnson, our database guru, who has been working on these upgrades. Now after all these years, we really have the ability to start visualizing on a watershed basis and querying the data based on watersheds and sub-watersheds, different HUC levels, and then actually analyzing and looking at data on a watershed basis, which is really what you need to be able to have that capability to do watershed management. Another data example of a data visualization tool are these line graphs. And this one is dissolved oxygen. It's taken from a site in the tributary of the P River down in the coastal plain. And as monitors get this information, they can look at long-term trend graphs. This is a good thing. This is really what we want to see, where dissolved oxygen had started off at somewhat low levels here in the early 2002, 2003, and has shown a steady improvement. The state mandatory minimum for DO is 5 parts per million, so anything below that line is not good for fish in aquatic communities. And here's another example of the bacteriological data. Our graphs are come out with these bar graphs as green, yellow, and red. And green bars mean that the E. coli are at acceptable levels for human contact, such as swimming and recreating in the water. Yellow and red are not. And this is from a tributary down in Wolf Bay, which is also down there in the coastal plain. And here, these blue ones are really good because those are all zeros. There's no bar there, they're just 0 E. coli. So that is also a very good trend that we like to see. And I obviously was somewhat biased in my examples and got sites with very good news that show good trends. But this is actually associated with the Wolf Bay folks interacting with the city of Foley and getting some infrastructure problems located and resolved that were causing some contamination in the local stream there. And we've got some new tools that we're looking at, interacting with some other researchers on campus. This one is a beta version of a card that has come out recently by Micrology Labs, who also supplies our cold scan easy gel plates. And this card is, we're really excited about it especially relative to our international work, because in some of the countries like Mexico and some of the South American countries and Africa, these plates are, number one, very difficult to ship if we actually take them over there when we're traveling. And they also are exposed to high tariffs or taxes, and they end up being about 3 times more expensive in these underdeveloped and developing countries than they cost here. So it becomes somewhat prohibitive, where these cards, it's just like a deck of cards, you can send 1,000 of them in a small box at a very low price. So we're doing some side-by-side testing. And this card, it specifically is looking at Enterococcus, which is another fecal bacteria. And this one is the bacteria of choice for marine or estuarine saltwater. Whereas E. coli, just because it does not survive that long in saltwater, brackish water, EPA recommends monitoring E. coli in Enterococcus in salt water. So looking at our data credibility, Dr. Deutsch spent a lot of time early on just working out these methods, what methods to be used in a statewide citizen monitoring program. And you can see this pendulum goes from not meaningful but very easy to not doable but very stringent standards. These are like test strips that are very easy to use, but they don't give very accurate data. And then of course the white lab code and standard methods gives very accurate data, but citizens don't have standard methods labs that they can go to, or the funds to set standard methods laboratories up. And so, these two methods are what Dr. Deutsch settled on back in the 90s as both being very affordable and relatively easy for a citizen monitor to pick up. We do a 6-hour training for our water chemistry and about a 3-hour training for our E. coli bacteriological monitoring. And then Dr. Deutsch went a step further and got EPA approval for both the bacteriological and water chemistry monitoring through EPA Region 4 in Atlanta. And the reason he went through that to get develop this quality assurance plan and get EPA stamp of approval is because when our monitors get certified, they are certified in EPA approved methods. So that gives them much more credibility than just going out and buying a hop kit or some kit on the internet, which may be fine, but they're not part of a statewide program with EPA approved quality assurance plans and standard operating procedures. We go through certifications, recertifications with our monitors, and that is very meaningful to local officials as well as the state. ADEM accepts our data and uses our data for several purposes as well. And you can get these information, these QA plans on our website under publications. And the basic foundation of the program starts with our trainings. We train all over the state, and then we have what's called a training of trainer. This is Taylor Steele. He's up at the Birmingham Botanical Gardens. He's one of our longtime trainers. He's doing a bacteriological training there in the Botanical Gardens. We've got about 3 staffers to cover the whole state, so it would be extremely difficult for us to grow the program with just 3 people. So we've got about 40 citizen trainers that have been trained in a train the trainer workshop and certified, and they go through refreshers as well, and they do the bulk of our training, about 60 to 70% of our training. And this is a training that we did up in Huntsville at UAH a couple of years ago. And then data credibility, we've done many other side-by-side comparisons This one was done out in the field with streams over there, Opelika, Rocky Brook, and Pepperell Branch. And this was comparing the Alabama Water Watch DO titration with a YSI DO meter. And you can see the meter in the green and the Alabama Water Watch in the yellow. This was done for an entire year at these different sites, and basically no significant difference in those results. And you can get this publication, this World Wildlife Fund publication, on our website as well to look at those examples. And another example, looking at alkalinity and hardness and pH. This is in a site in Reutebuch. And does anybody have any idea why back in the early 2000s alkalinity was so much higher than hardness in the Salkehatchie Creek? This is a kind of an interesting story. There was a big West Point Stevens, West Point Pepperell textile mill in Opelika. And the textile dyes for years and years flowed down the Salkehatchie, and the textile dyes are very alkaline dyes, so we get very high alkalinity in the creek, but low hardness, because alkalinity and hardness should normally be almost equal in natural waters because they come from calcium carbonate limestone dissolving. So when limestone dissolves, you get basically a fairly equal amount of hardness and an equal amount of alkalinity. So that's the reason why this alkalinity was close to being double versus the hardness in Salkehatchie Creek. West Point Stevens became West Point home, then they moved to Pakistan, and so now the alkalinity and hardness is essentially equal all the way down the creek. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it shows that the impacts of the stream have definitely changed, and that's also documented in that publication. So what would it cost to start monitoring or be a Water Watch monitor? This is a very nice, clean Standard Methods lab off the internet there on the left, and that cost about $1 gazillion. And this one on the right cost a couple $100. In fact, most of our monitors don't pay anything for our test kits because they become a member of a group. Like I'm a member of Lake Watch of Lake Martin because I live up on Lake Martin. So Lake Martin buys my kit and provides me with chemicals, and that's generally the case all over the state. The local groups tend to have dues, pool funds, specifically for the purpose of monitoring their local water resources. And then trainings we provide for free. This is on our website. These are trainings in September and October. I think there's seven of them. And these are not in Auburn, but we will be posting one. We usually do trainings in Auburn about seasonally, 4 or 5 times a year. So we'll be posting one in Auburn here before too long. And they are free. Anybody that wants to get trained up. Monitoring supplies. If you click the store button there on Alabama Water Watch, you get to these monitoring supplies, bacteriological, water chemistry monitoring supplies. And just for prices, you can see that the bacteriological supplies, these are about $3 per replicate, so that's about $9 there. We always do triplicate measurements in the E. coli because, as you can imagine, the bacteria out in the environment in the streams is pretty unevenly distributed. So we may get one plate with one blue dot, the next plate may have 4 blue dots, and the third plate may have 2 blue dots or something like that. So it just gives us a much better estimate when you take the mean of 3 replicates of the bacteria. You could just do one sample, but we encourage all of our monitors to do triplicate samples. It's about $9 for the sample. And then this water chemistry kit is about $300 and about $100 per year for chemical refills. And that's in the store. And so let's get into some applications. Does anybody recognize this ad besides me? I don't know, you younger folks may not recognize this ad. This was a big ad in the 70s maybe, for 80s. I can't remember. But anyway, there's the little dinky hamburger on the bun. I think it was a Wendy's commercial, if I remember right. Busting on maybe Burger King or something like that. Pretty effective ad. Anyway, so what are the Water Watch data used for? Very much so for community outreach and community activities, conservation, protection of aquatic species. This is Marty Schulman up in Roebuck Springs, which is one of the few habitats left for the endangered watercress darter. He's been monitoring there for at least a half a dozen years, just monitoring the water chemistry and keeping an eye on that very limited habitat of that endangered species. Routine monitoring for required ADEM reports. I'll give a few examples of that. Source tracking of contaminated water, monitoring of public swimming areas, prioritizing of state monitoring efforts. We just sent our data set for the past year to ADEM because they requested every year to help them prioritize their resources in selecting their monitoring sites every year. And supporting ADEM's use classification and special designation upgrades or downgrades, just having that database to look at, and supporting 303D listed impaired stream or water body listings or delistings. So just giving a few examples, this is from Logan Martin Lake Protection Association up on Lake Logan Martin in Pell City. Wayne Wilcox has been monitoring it at the Lakeside Park swim beach area for several years. And you can see that a lot of red bars, right? A lot of kind of not so good bacteria levels, harmful bacteria levels up to into the thousands per 100 mils, when it should be lower than 200 per 100 mils. And so Logan Martin Lake Protection Association would normally communicate with the city of Pell City, and when they got these harmful high levels, they would block off the beach. And then they went a step further and they worked with Pell City folks, the Logan Martin Lake Protection Association, to develop an ordinance and say, do not feed the cute ducks and Canada geese and the waterfowl at the swimming beach area. Because if you feed them at the swimming beach area, they stay at the swimming beach area, and then they make deposits at the swimming beach area. And so they passed this ordinance and put signage up, and then the very next year that we tested, the E. coli dropped off dramatically. Just from a very simple, practical activity of making this ordinance and putting signage up. So that was very encouraging. And then this is some data from the Cahaba River Keeper, Myra Crawford, who's been doing some great things up there on the Cahaba. She would get calls, started getting calls about, is it safe to swim in the Cahaba? Because as you know, if you've driven up to Birmingham on 280, the Cahaba goes right through Birmingham. So is the river safe to swim and recreate in? And she couldn't answer that, and we said, well, start monitoring and see what you get. And these are several sites on the river. And so does anybody have an idea where sites that would not be good for swimming would be. Any ideas from those graphs?
Downstream from Birmingham.
Yeah, these downstream sites, not too good. They got yellow and red bars. But I'd choose this one, and this one would be my two top choices. So she started doing this E. coli monitoring and had this data readily available. In fact, it's on the swim guide now, which I'll mention in a minute, which makes it even more available to an international audience. So just, $9 a shot, monitoring those sites and getting that data that's valuable for protecting public health, or for you to make a decision. Do I want to go swimming here, or do I want to go swimming there? What are the implications of that? And this is an example of using the Water Watch activities for required ADEM reports. This ADEM Phase 2 stormwater regulations requires cities like Auburn, Opelika, Smith Station to fill out, number one, get an application for discharging stormwater. Number two, they have to send ADEM an annual report. It's required. Oh, I guess maybe I'm finished. I probably talked too long anyway.
Which one's the bottom button?
No, on his.
Oh, did I hit something?
The one that looks like a screen.
Looks like a screen. That's weird. If I hit escape, would that work?
Try.
Yeah, I was almost through anyway. It's probably the most time to quit.
Oh, looks like it went from a laptop to the computer.
Ah, okay.
There we go. I don't know how that happened. That's weird.
It's probably saying, man, shut up, you talk too long.
There you go.
So that example was an example of using the local Water Watch data to actually fulfill legal requirements of turning in these reports to ADEM. And this one shot is from the city of Auburn, and it's right out of their report. I'll get to it here in a second. There, we're almost there. So actually, the cities are pretty happy that citizens do these monitoring efforts in their municipalities. If it's in a collaborative effort, and they can actually, they're required to do outreach, and they're required to do monitoring in the cities. And some of these cities, like if you've been to Smith Station, it's a pretty small town, and they don't have a lot of resources. So this Water Watch monitoring and outreach makes even more sense to them. That's from the city of Auburn. This is from Lee County, who also has to have a stormwater permit, and who also has to submit these annual reports. And this is straight out of their report. These are actually Water Watch sites that they monitor, and they put in our database, and they fulfill their requirements to ADEM. So there's Joey Huntley from Lee County actually sampling with us. In fact, they have gotten to the point where in the Auburn-Opelika area, Lee County, City of Auburn, Dan Ballard, City of Opelika, Scott Parker have actually cut us a check, actually financially support Save Our Saugahatchee, the local monitoring group that monitors sites in Lee County, monitors sites in Auburn and Opelika. And we gladly make that a data available to them, which helps them out to fulfill these legal requirements in their reports. And then getting into some policy stuff, this is a very wonderful success story. Back in 2007, after almost a decade of monitoring and watershed stewardship activities, Wolf Bay Watershed Watch was able to get the Wolf Bay upgraded to OAW, Outstanding Alabama Waters. And you say, well, what does that mean? It means that Wolf Bay will be protected in perpetuity from additional point sources and a lot of potential pollution sources that would have probably certainly come from that highly developing area down there. Now it has water quality standards and protections way up above and beyond the rest of our state waters. So it's a big deal. And then in 2010, at Lake Martin, this is former Governor Bob Riley at Kalijah. Lake Watch of Lake Martin, spearheaded by Dick Bronson right there, founder and president of the group, was able to upgrade Lake Martin to what's called Treasure Alabama Lake, TAL status, which again has some very significant implications of improved water quality standards and no new point sources for Lake Martin for potentially forever. So that was a big deal and a very good thing and great news. And then one very recent thing that I mentioned is Swim Guide. Water Watch became affiliated with Swim Guide back in 2013, and it's an international web-based tool, which is very cool, that if you go to it, you can get thousands. It's growing every year. I think there's about 7,500 swim beaches in it now. And basically it's red or green is the most recent data for that beach, good or bad for swimming and whole body contact. And so in 2014, we actually had 16 freshwater sites in Alabama. This is the Swim Guide interface here. And you zoom in and these circles will break out into separate swim site areas. You can see the vast concentration are on the coast because the states monitor the coastal marine beaches. Alabama does not monitor any freshwater beaches. And that's where we feel like the citizens really have a strong presence and a strong purpose to measure freshwater. And then by 2016, we jumped up to 41 freshwater sites in Alabama. We've been advocating Swim Beach in all of our bacteriological trainings. And so you can see that they're throughout the state now, and they are growing. And this is just a webpage of the Swim Beach at Lake Martin. And I actually monitor right there at the Wind Creek State Park Swim Beach. And as you can see, thankfully it's green. Lake Martin is classified as one of the cleanest, if not the cleanest lake in the state. So it's good that the monitoring verifies that and we don't have any problems. And the folks up at Lake Martin, the superintendent actually helped design this page, and they benefit because this basically advertises Wind Creek State Park to an international audience. So it's another way to get your name out. Now, if you had a bunch of fecal pollution in your swim beach, it might not be too good of an advertisement, but on the other hand, it may put pressure on polluters to clean it up as well. So I think generally it's a win-win situation for any public swimming area to have this regular monitoring, whether their staff does it or whether a local citizen monitoring group monitors those waters. So just in closing, I'd like to mention a few things. Dr. Kalin said that there may be several international students in the audience that might be interested in Global Water Watch. So after Dr. Deutsch got the Alabama Water Watch started, he's been traveling to many different countries, as you can see here, and basically spreading the same community-based watershed stewardship model to countries all around the world. Some of these are not nearly as active as they once were, but the most active ones we've got right now are in South Central America. And Dr. Deutsch just started working with folks out in Seattle, in Washington, called the Snow King Group, that have monitored. Interestingly, the ultra environmental Pacific Northwest folks came to Alabama for their citizen water monitoring program. So that was kind of cool and kind of exciting. And our most active international program is definitely Mexico. Sergio Ruiz Cordova works down there, and the program has spread through 15 of the 30 states or 31 states in Mexico. So about half the country is now actively involved in global water watch monitoring. And the other active group is over here in Kenya. Dr. Deutsch has been going to Kenya for the last couple of years and has 100 sites in the mountainous areas in Kenya that the folks over there are monitoring. And here's the Global Water Watch group. Dr. Deutsch, the founder, and then Sergio is the local coordinator for Global Water Watch. And we'd be very happy to give you more information on that if you're interested. So just in conclusion, the benefits of Alabama Water Watch: effective way to engage watershed residents and increase public awareness of water issues, establishing a network of eyes and ears that regularly monitors water body conditions. That's been a huge factor in detecting impacts and pollution through the last couple decades in this Auburn-like area. Extremely cost-effective way to initiate watershed monitoring, and it establishes credible scientific basis for watershed protection, restoration, and policy activities. And this is our website, and again, let me see here. It's alabamawaterwatch.org. Oops. alabamawaterwatch.org. And then this, actually, if you click on the Global Water Watch, you'll come to the Global Water Watch page. You can get a lot of information on Global Water Watch. I think that's about all I got, yeah. And if you want, we'd be happy for you to come visit and see us over in the Auburn Research Park and War Eagle. So any questions, I'd be happy to entertain any questions you might have. And feel free to come and get trained up at any of our trainings.
How do you find the citizens who are interested in the monitoring work?
They come to us.
Oh,
Yeah, they usually, we do a blog and we have a listserv, and usually we get inquiries either by email or phone. Or they either come to us or they come to the local monitoring group, because we have groups on all the major reservoirs. There's like 40 major reservoirs around the state, pretty strong groups. And then we have strong groups like on the Locust Fork River and in the Black Warrior. And so usually the folks contact us about wanting to get trained, and then we post workshops in those regions, those areas. And we usually require 10 people to sign up for a workshop, especially if we're having to travel 3 or 4 or 5 hours. But I've done them before with, 4 or 5 people. You never know when that real dynamic person's going to come into a workshop and really get things cranked up in their area. So, yeah.
So in other state or other country have similar program or?
Yeah, very similar. It's basically the same methods, the same workbooks, workshop manuals translated to Spanish or what is it, Swahili in Kenya. And so basically we use the same manuals for our water chemistry, bacteriological, stream biomonitoring in other countries. Although there is definitely an exchange, like in Mexico, there's been a very dynamic group down there that Dr. Deutsch worked with to develop stream discharge. Well, we don't do stream discharge with the water watch monitor, so they kind of taught us. They use a floating orange and a aerial if you aerial cross section of the stream and a floating orange to calculate discharge.
So how you can combine the data together or?
We haven't done that globally, haven't really found a need for that. It would take some work, but we're always open to ideas, especially from researchers who might have cool ideas about data applications and things we might look at. As you saw, our web tools are pretty simple, whether the trend or the parameter is increasing or decreasing. That's basically kind of the limits of our online tools, but very simple and straightforward to understand for the public, when they can see, geez, over the last 5 years, my dissolved oxygen in my stream has plummeted. That is easy to interpret, but on the other hand, more sophisticated analyses would be very interesting to do on this 85,000 record data set. So,
Do you have any support for materials for global water watch? For example, if I go back to my country, if I try to do it, can you give me some materials, or are you giving just list or the materials for biochemicals?
our Global Water Watch organization works with countries, especially to secure grants and funding. Like, we work closely with Global Water Watch Mexico, they are centered in Veracruz, and working with them, they got a, what was it, FAO, I'm not sure if that's right. They got a large grant, international organizational grant, and they're able for 3 years now to really launch their program. So we don't have like an account full of money sitting where we can just, give out, but we work with partnering countries to try to secure funds for supplies, because it's a challenge. I mean, if you go to a developing country and instead of $9 for a triplicate of E. coli testing, it's $30, that's a lot of money in a developing country. So we try to work with our global network and grant opportunities to try to secure some funding for that, because that's a big challenge, for sure.
So how long for a training section will last before the person can do the monitoring work?
Our water chemistry is about 6 hours, and our bacteriological only takes about 3 hours. Bacteriological, very simple test. You use a sterile disposable pipette up a mill of water, squirt it in the media, pour it in the petri dish, let it sit for an hour and solidify, stick it in the incubator. Very simple test. The water chemistry is more complex, especially the dissolved oxygen. We use the Winkler titration, and it's a bit more complicated. So the training, we go through the 6 parameters in water chemistry in about 6 hours. But so within a half a day, the next day you can go out and test because you're certified.
Okay.
We do encourage new monitors to go with experienced monitors their very first time. Because it's a lot to absorb all this hardness, alkalinity, dissolved oxygen, pH, all these tests. So after they go through the training, we really like them to go out with an experienced monitor to help mentor them for the first couple of times.
Do you need to issue a certificate before they can do the work?
We issue a letter of certification,
Okay.
but we don't require them to have their certificate the day after when they monitor. We've actually seen monitors out, like over in Lake Harding, that weekend monitoring, a few days after their training. So, but they do get a certificate of certification, but we don't tell them to carry that with them. It's just more for the records.
So who will decide or choose the monitoring size? How many sites, where we can monitor?
That's a very good question. We typically leave it up to the group, and we advise the group, like, if I live on Lake Martin and there's a person next to me monitoring off her or his dock, I probably don't want to monitor off my dock because we've got water quality information right next door. So we try to advise people to look at the strategic sites, and the groups are very knowledgeable on which sites are important, where point source inputs are coming, or wastewater treatment plants coming in, and so on. But we interact with the group to help them, but it's ultimately up to the group or the person to decide which site they want to monitor.
So the person needs to buy the monitoring supplies.
Yeah,
Is
although the group usually supplies that. Like, I work with Lake Watch of Lake Martin, we collect dues. The group provides me with supplies to
okay,
monitor.
you do not buy by yourself.
Right, right. So that works out very well. And then, as you saw, the city of Auburn, Opelika, and Lee County actually are paying us in the Save Our Saugahatchee local group. They're paying all of our monitoring supplies because they get value from that data. So it depends, but generally the individual doesn't have to go out and buy his or her own supplies.
Do you do any, monitoring or trying to figure out where the pollution is coming from? Or do you just strictly do monitoring and then the data's out there for other people to try and figure out where it's coming from?
We highly encourage groups to use their data. And like when we do that bacteria blitz in the Auburn, Opelika, Saugahatchee area, we send the data directly to Dan Ballard in the city of Auburn and Scott Parker in Opelika. And if we have a high hit, Dan is usually out that day, checking it out. And we've just got a very good collaborative relationship. Some groups, it's a little bit different, but the way we train people, our volunteers, is not to use the data to embarrass somebody or beat them over the head, but to work with their local resource management entity to try to resolve the problem.
Gotcha. So you more so provide that your organization itself doesn't go out and try and find the source of pollution?
We actually do go out and then do follow-up monitoring. The coal scan, easy gel, and truck. Sometimes, not always. As you can imagine, there's a continuum of a spectrum of activities, but if around Auburn, Opelika, we tend to follow up and like, geez, if it was coming down here, let's test up here and see if we're still up there, and then work with local entities. So that depends. And then some areas maybe are not so receptive to cooperating with local groups, so that is highly variable.
Right.
But we encourage people to use their data to solve the problems, not just find a problem. Good question.
So you gather all the data by the groups?
Yeah, and we do data interpretation sessions upon request where we'll go to Smith Lake, we'll go to Locust Fork, we'll go to Lake Guntersville or whomever, wherever, and say if they want us to come up, and we highly encourage that, and look at their 5, 10 years of data and say, look, this spot here, you've had a steadily degrading water quality condition. Let's look at the Google Earth map and see what's going on in the watershed. Or let's consider adding these sites, to try to track down where the.
So you try to find the point of infection or the source of infection after that?
Yeah. And then it gets tricky, it gets interesting, because maybe it's somebody, a big company that says, forget you, I want to do what I want to do, So again, there are many different situations. Or maybe it's an entity like the city of Auburn, and we say, geez, we must have a leaky sewer line there. We will, but let's go find it, But the goal is to not only find contamination or water quality problems, but to solve them. And sometimes it works, and sometimes it takes a little longer to work. So, but I'd love to see some of you at our next training session and give us a holler or come over to the office and visit. You can meet Sergio. He'll get out his triangle and let you tune.
How many citizen monitors do you have in Auburn?
In SOS, we have about 100 members, about 12 to 15 come to our meetings regularly. We got about 10 that are regular monitors that do that blitz monitoring and monitor not only bacteria and monitor water chemistry regularly up and down the Salkehatchie. And if any of you want to get plugged into like our local monitoring group, Save Our Salkehatchie is a great group of folks. Next year will be our 20th year. And just shoot me an email and I'll get you on the list. We meet about once every 2 months, 6 times a year, and have speakers. We had Brian Helms gave a great talk about crayfish at our last meeting. And we can get you plugged into monitoring some very cool strategic spots on the creek too. We're always looking for young, energetic people. Getting harder to see those marks on the titration tubes. Any other questions? Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.